All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Green. I'm a VP product at King. I still have your laptop here. I don't know if you want that back or there's some kind of cool stuff on here, some company secrets.
Thank you.
I'm going to do actually unplanned, but a complimentary talk, I think. So Phil talked very eloquently and interestingly about designing games for the long term, designing these living games. What kinds of products, what kinds of experiences are you trying to build? I'm going to talk about the flip side of that. So from the point of view of most people in the room, we're making games. I'm going to talk about how to think about those games, in my view, from the inside out. So how do you build teams? How do you organize your own group? How do you work with your colleagues and with your partners to build games which can live for a very long time? Okay. Now, I'm going to start with a different story. When I was 15, I made a box. This box here. Now, I was in a technology class at school. Resistant materials, for those of you old enough to have studied in that era. GCSE. Apparently they don't exist anymore. And there are some problems with this box. Now I realise later on. The switch is dangerously close to the fan. That doesn't seem like a good idea with hindsight. But the problem is that this box sat in my room at my parents' house for 20 years. It didn't get any better. Now, games used to come in boxes too. And they still do in many cases. Some were good boxes. There's some absolute classics on here. Some were bad boxes. A couple of guys I worked with in the last 2 years, they had won an award in Sweden for the worst game box art ever created, which they had on their desks as a suitably ugly award. But whatever the quality of the box, the quality of the game, when you got it out of the box, that was fixed, right? It couldn't change. So, I mean, this absolutely legendary game here, I would say the gameplay still stands up today, 20 plus years later in GoldenEye. I also still have nightmares about polygon faces running through my head. Now, the games were fixed in quality, but games don't come in boxes anymore in most cases. We're here at a mobile-centric conference, but one of the cool things is that we see a kind of convergence of mobile, of PC, of online, bringing RuneScape to mobile. That's awesome news. That's really cool. That's happening right now. So, but although many games don't come in boxes anymore, you download them from the store, you get them wherever else, we still, I think, treat them very often as if they do. We still think about them. I think we still write about them. I think we still make them sometimes as if they are fixed at the point of release. And you can see this in Pocket Gamer. Sorry, Chris. I looked through the top 100 stories on Pocket Gamer the other day. 65 of the top 100 were about new games. So I'd say very misrepresentative of where most of the audience is right now. Yes, indeed. So again, as a games industry, we're often still thinking in this boxed model. But when games comes out of the box, something different happens, and we've got to think about and work with them differently. So when we tell the story of 2017, we can tell it in this way. We can talk about launches, new boxes. We can talk about Fire Emblem, Golf Clash, Bubble Witch 3, Homescapes. But the real story, in my view, is not these games. The real story, in my view, is the strength of the live games. So if you look at the top 10 on App Annie, you can see most of these games, 8 out of 10, were released more than 1 year ago, and some of them many years before that. Candy, we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. I think Clash of Clans is the same, maybe even a few months older. So it's a problem for us because when we look at these, being all smart people, we do pattern matching. So we look at when we tell the story this way, we pattern match and we try to predict what's going to happen next based on launches. But in practice, this is where we should be looking, I think, and this is how we should be telling stories. So today I'm going to focus a little bit on 3 aspects of making these live or living games from game production point of view. Okay? And if there's time for questions at the end, you're very welcome. Otherwise, I'll be around all day. Please come and talk. I'm here to learn, so I want to learn from all of you as well how you see these problems. Okay, so the first thing. One analogy that we can use is to think about movies versus TV shows. So imagine that you're a movie director. You're very focused on that launch date. You've got the marketing is booked, the press tours are booked, the red carpets are booked, and you need to get that bloody film out. Right? It's coming out in the summer, come what may. It doesn't really matter. There's a big push for the finish line, and that gives you your perspective. My brother works in films, he does special effects for movies, and he is always very, very focused on that hard launch date, because that's when he has to stop and when the thing goes out into the world. But if we think about ourselves instead as let's say, a showrunner for a long-running TV series, imagine that we're running Lost, and imagine that we're not making it up as we go along. Then we're trying to figure out what does that long-term look like, taking a long-term perspective, and what changes when we take that long-term perspective. So over time, we're trying to craft a story. We're trying to build an experience. We're trying to shape it. So long as when we released it, we had a big enough audience to sustain and get to the next series, then we can improve it. And you might make different decisions there. So one way in which we think about this differently in the teams I'm working with is that, so technical debt is a problem for everyone, right? We try to avoid it. This is a sort of quantity of oozing into the projects, out of the corners, up through the floorboards. We try to sort of stamp on it wherever we can, get rid of that terrible technical debt. Now, if you would take a short-term view, then you would say, okay, my launch date is here, and what I need to do is to remove the worst bugs before I launch. And in the end, what worst means might change because, well, you're running out of time. That gives you a view on how to solve problems, which is very different if you take a different perspective. So if we take a very long-term perspective then, making an investment in quality of the game, solving older problems to make our future productivity, our future happiness of our dev teams better, is a very smart investment because our horizon is a very long time away, very long way away. So we're thinking about movies versus TV shows. I think we're more on the TV side when we're thinking about running live games. Okay, next example. So on the right here is a guy called Callum Giles. Those of you who watched the Olympics in '96, I guess it was, Atlanta, and who caught, it's amazing how you watch these sports that you never would normally watch, but somehow because it's the Olympics they become interesting, watched lots of hockey in 1996. So Callum Giles is a British hockey player, and he has a speciality, scored 110 goals in 143 games, but he didn't play very much. So in hockey you have rolling substitutions, you can bring people on and bring them off as much as you like. And Callum Giles has a speciality, or had a speciality, where if there was a penalty corner, so it's like a corner kick in football, he would stand on the edge and he would come on, they would hit the ball out to him and he would crash it into the goal. He was extremely good at that one set play. Now, this to me sounds a little bit like the way that we structure our projects when we're looking for, again, with a short-term focus. We're looking for specialists, for people who can wield the scalpel, who can do a very specific job. And we want absolute rock stars in that role because it's time limited, right? That person is going to be there for the duration of the project. By comparison, on the right here, I came across this the other day. It's a painting called Still Life and Ruime, which I'm pronouncing wrong for sure. I'm now going to pronounce a name wrong, Peter Cleisch. It's a Dutch name, so I at the end. Now, he was part of this Dutch school in the 16th, 17th century, and what was quite striking about this picture, what kind of amazed me, was that I always had in mind the idea of an artist as the singular visionary genius, particularly in this period that they would, like Michelangelo, be kind of painting away for years, and they would come out with this amazing thing that was done. But this wasn't how this Dutch still life school worked at all. Actually, they had multiple people working on the same painting. And this is a rare example, which I've now blocked out with my humble sorting. There's a rare example where you see more than one signature on the painting. Because what happened was that Peter Cleisch would paint this part, the wine and the bread and the cloth and the leaves in the background. But he had another specialist in his school who would paint the grapes and the apples. So they were specialists. Now, what they were doing when they were building that school was not trying to pick up a Callum Giles for this and a Callum Giles for that. Instead, they were focusing very much on who is the next in line. to do this specialist work, and how can we create multiple pictures at the same time? So they're putting a great emphasis on training people up, on finding the person who can be really great at grapes in a few years' time. Very different model for building teams. On one hand, we're finding extra, ultra rockstar specialists because we've got this one specific thing. We've got an Olympics, we've got a specific launch that we need to worry about. Over here, we're not too worried about that because what we're trying to do is build something up for the long term. And so even if we would get the Callum Giles of grape painting joining our studio, the first task we're setting him is, okay, who is next? Who is the guy who's going to be the next you? Who's the guy who's going to replace you and build this? Because when we're making games that now can last 5, 10, 20, 30 years, it doesn't matter, actually, who's in the team today. What you're trying to build is a team for the long run. So in 10 years' time, the teams I'm working on, probably everybody in that team will be gone. But the game will still be there. So we've got to think about team building in a very different way. All right, third and final one. Now here, what's been kind of amazing for me working at King the last few years is the realization that actually in some places we're sort of out there on our own or with very few others. So now if we're making in mobile free-to-play context, Candy celebrated its 5-year anniversary at the end of last year. There aren't very many games around that have done that at some scale. So that means that there's no blueprint. You don't have loads of different options set up. You can't read, here are 10 things you must do when your game reaches the age of 25. That doesn't exist. Comparable articles do exist for how to launch your games, how to get your games out, how to get the box out onto the shelves. But what do you do after the game's been around for 5 years? How do you think about the project? What kind of problems are you going to be facing? What does your audience look like? Probably very different. There's no blueprint for that. So for me, the most fun thing about working in mobile in live games is it's not clear what to do next, actually. We'll have to try to figure that out as we go. Okay, so 3 different ways of thinking about making live games from production on the inside. So I talked now briefly about my own perspective on this, and then I'll kind of wrap up and look a bit ahead. Okay, so I spent 2 years working on Candy Crush and running the Candy Crush Saga team in Stockholm. Moved back to London a few months ago, and now I'm working in the London studio. I was there before, actually. I helped to launch Farm Heroes Saga. So I'm trying to bring some of that experience from Candy back to the teams in London. And in the London studio in King right now, we're doing a number of different things. We've got this Farm Heroes Saga game. It's been around for about almost 5 years now, actually. We're celebrating 5 years in the spring this year. We've got the Super Saga, which is a sister title. Still going very strong, discovering all sorts of new types of innovation. And there's a whole lot more, which is all this fun stuff which I can't tell you about. But all this to say that we are working on a very wide range of different topics now. And I hope that in my own small way I can kind of contribute to a change in trajectory in that studio. Part of a new leadership team. We have a new strategy, a new approach, new way of thinking about these problems that we're trying to solve. And we'll put that into context of King, a very broad product portfolio. So we're kind of known as the Candy Crush company, I think, but that's going to change. If you look at the pipeline right now, then it would look very different to you. Huge reach. So King still has an audience bigger than Twitter, bigger than LinkedIn, bigger than Snapchat. This blows my mind. I just have to remind myself and say that from time to time. And that gives you a platform, right? So if you're interested in making games, you're interested in launching games, this is a place where you can do that. We've got a lot of games and IPs that people know. We're building new ones too. And connected with that, it was announced recently we're working on Call of Duty Mobile because we're now part of Activision Blizzard. So one of the coolest things that's happened since that acquisition is getting to talk to teams that have worked on live games for a very long time. So, okay, I've got a problem with how to think about this thing in Farm or in Candy. Okay, I'm going to talk to the guys that run World of Warcraft. Awesome. That is a really cool thing to be able to do. Now, let's bring it back together. So, in 2018, these stories aren't, the top stories for 2018, they're not written yet. I'm super excited, personally, that for the games that we're going to launch, that all of you are going to launch, that all of our friends around the industry are going to launch this year. But I'm just as excited to see what the live or the living games are going to come up with. So ours, Candy and Soda and Farm. There's some Supercell like Clash Royale, Gardenscapes, other new players in the market. A lot of you are probably working on games which we're playing too and which we're trying to understand. playing games that have been out for a long time. I think we've heard some stories from competitors where they have a big PR launch, and 6 months later, after all the noise has died down, there's only one developer working on the game. That's when you can't scale the game. That's a problem that you have. But a lot of those games are just listed. That's not a problem that we have right now. And so I'm hoping that we and Supercell and Playrix and all of the others, all of you out there, will come up with some super cool stuff this year. Because in the live games, that's where the players are, right? That's where all the money is made. That's where a lot of the coolest innovation is happening. Those games are getting better every day. And maybe we'll continue to do so for years to come. So yeah, we're lucky every single day get to improve the box. Thanks for your time. Hope you enjoy the conference.
Time for a question. Because we've got a bit of time there. We've got time for one question. If anyone's got a question for Todd, come on. There's got to be a question. This is King. You can ask him how much money they've made or something. How much money have you made? No, okay. Okay, there's a question here for the gentleman in front. Have we got a microphone coming to you? There's a microphone coming. Just one question, but we'll...
Hi.
Is this on? Okay.
I can hear you.
Well, my question is, because you do have so many games under your portfolio, how your company is structured, do you guys have multiple teams that sort of manage each particular game, or is there like one team that does all the games?
Okay, so just in case anyone didn't hear, the question was about how to structure the teams to support multiple games that are live. So we've got 8-9 studios, and we really believe that the best way to approach working with these games is to have the team working close together on a consistent basis. So for each of those games that I just listed, there's a team that's dedicated to that project, and that can stay on that project for a long time. So some of my colleagues that I was working with in Candy have been there 5-6 years. Working on that one game. And that's where you get that's the example with the painting school, that you get that build-up of expertise and experience, and that informs your gut instinct. So one challenge that I think we've got in London now is with quite a junior team in terms of experience with the products. We don't have such a strong instinct for what's going to work for the players and for the audience, so we're rebuilding that right now.